We have just gotten a verdict from Brighton this afternoon as the Adams County Court has just been in session to announce a verdict in the case of Nathan Woodyard. He was the third of three police officers on trial in the death of Elijah McClain.
In August of 2019, he was the first officer to confront McClain. There had been a 911 call saying that a man looked sketchy. We've emphasized this many times. Elijah McClain was doing nothing wrong. He'd simply gone to a convenience store, bought some iced tea, and was walking home. That's when Aurora officers made contact with him. Nathan Woodyard was the first to make contact with him, and he did use what they call a neck hold on McClain.
And we should say that Nathan Woodyard has been found not guilty on both counts of reckless manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide. The jury started its deliberations Friday at lunchtime, and then Monday, now after what amounts to about 8 or 9 hours of deliberations, came forward with these two verdicts, acquitting Officer Nathan Woodyard, finding him not guilty on those two charges. We should point out, in the first trial of two police officers, Randy Rodima was found guilty in the death of Elijah McClain on a charge of criminally negligent homicide. Jason Rosenblatt, the other officer involved in that first trial, was also found not guilty, as was Nathan Woodyard today. And now, of course, there still is a third trial pending, that of the EMTs who administered the ketamine that the coroner has said did officially kill Elijah McClain. Our reporter Chris Vanderveen, of course, has been following the story with many of us. And the separation of these cases into three cases, the separation of the first case even into two officers getting split verdicts, that continues.
Yeah, you have three essentially distinctive trials in all of this, and now today you've just had an acquittal of now two of the three officers that were involved in the restraint, sort of the forcible restraint and the ketamine use of Elijah McClain. This trial was a little bit different, as you know, because in this trial, the officer elected to testify. Remember, in the previous round, those two officers elected not to testify. One was acquitted, Jason Rosenblatt was acquitted, Randy Rodima was found guilty of a lesser charge. In this case, maybe the decision to testify was an advantageous one for this particular officer, because at the end, this is what that officer wanted to see, an acquittal.
He talked a lot about how he felt like he was going to die. He thought there was some kind of a weapon. He was scared. He was going to die in that moment, and that's why he reacted as he did. But I think there was plenty of questions about, again, the medical testimony, which is so difficult.
And really the key to this trial was the amount of emphasis that they put on the EMT, on the paramedics, in terms of that administration of ketamine. Remember that in this case, Nathan Woodyard was there at the beginning. He was very instrumental in bringing Elijah McClain down to the ground and holding him down, where there was that thought that maybe Elijah McClain was reaching for an officer's gun. That's what they say escalated this. And then he gets down to the ground, and then essentially Woodyard leaves the scene for a little bit.
Right, goes to his car.
Goes to his car, isn't even around. And his defense made a big deal out of that. They also said, look, he wasn't the one that was responsible for giving the ketamine. It was the paramedics that showed up a little bit later to give the ketamine. And obviously that presents some challenges for the next round of trials that are said to begin after all this. But in this case, it appears as if the jury did believe that in essence, the decision to give ketamine, which was, according to the coroner's testimony, the reason why Elijah McClain died, was the excess of ketamine that was given. In that case, they said that's what killed him. Woodyard didn't give him ketamine, so therefore we have to acquit Nathan Woodyard.
So the jury goes in this direction, but unless you're in a vacuum, you realize the impact that this verdict now has on people who feel that Elijah McClain, was killed for no good reason, and so that those people who want justice for Elijah McClain, Elijah's mother wasn't satisfied with the verdict in the first trial. You know she won't be satisfied with the verdict today.
Yeah, this will be a very, very difficult sort of verdict for family, for community members, for a lot of people that watch this case for a number of years. And really the headline today now is two of the three officers that had so much scrutiny put on them, two of the three officers have now been acquitted in the death of Elijah McClain. That is a big deal. Now, it hasn't gone 0 for 3. There was one officer that was found guilty, but at the end of the day, this was a decision. Remember, this was a decision that the local prosecutor initially decided not to prosecute. The Adams County District Attorney decided, we're not going to prosecute in this case. And then eventually it left it up to the state attorney general and the governor's office to sort of get involved in all of this and to sort of really, in some people's minds, put political pressure on this to review the case. And that's what led to where we are today. It'll be interesting to hear what Phil Weiser thinks about all this, the attorney general, thinking about, was this a good decision? I bet he'll say yes. But you can't escape the fact that 2 out of 3 officers have now been acquitted.
We're expecting
Many
to hear from...
changes have happened, at least within the department, but we'll have to see. One of the people that has been in court every single day is our Kevin Bond, and he is joining us now. And Kevin, now you've gone through the first trial, now this second trial. A lot of the same evidence presented in both trials, if you will, because so much of the emphasis is on what killed Elijah McClain.
That's right, Kim. The prosecution case was nearly identical in these 2 trials. Of the 24 or so witnesses called each time, 21 or 22 of them testified in both trials. So the prosecution case was very similar. The difference in this case from the first one is that the defense put on a case. You'll remember in the earlier trial of those 2 officers, the defense called no witnesses and arrested without putting anything before the jury. And that case, of course, ended with 1 officer being found guilty, 1 being acquitted. In this case, the defense did put on witnesses, focusing heavily on the conduct of the paramedics. And a little while ago, the jury returned this verdict acquitting Nathan Woodyard of reckless manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide in the death of Elijah McClain.
And again, we talk about what happened here. We talked about the state getting involved in this case, but it was also the echoes of George Floyd that animated a great deal of this. And we talk about police contacting people on the street, and the genesis of Elijah McClain's death was that interaction between Aurora PD and a young man walking home. And so now we've completed these trials as far as what initially happened with the police and Elijah McClain. And next we'll move into the EMT part of this. What happened once he was on the ground, once he had been, wrestling with officers, if you will.
And how soon is that again, Kevin? I know it's what, a couple weeks?
The paramedics are scheduled to go on trial November 27th. All indications are that trial is going to go ahead as planned. Jurors are going to be brought in actually on November 17th to fill out questionnaires. So that jury selection process is going to start in just a couple of weeks.
You have to be interested as to how that trial has taken shape, because
Yes.
these first 2 trials did focus, including via the prosecution, on the ketamine, and it does seem like there's been a lot of weight pushed towards the ketamine, the coroner's decision about ketamine, and what that might mean for that next trial.
Yeah, that's been the whole argument here. Even the prosecution has argued and acknowledged that the ketamine administered to Elijah McClain stopped his heart and caused his death. They've argued secondarily that the actions of the officers put Elijah McClain into a life-threatening situation, that he might have died even without the ketamine. And they further argued to the jury that these officers and the paramedics sort of were all complicit with each other, that this was one act that played out over about 18 and a half minutes on an Aurora street, along an Aurora street, and that they were all involved with each other. Obviously, in this case, this jury saw it differently. I wanted to note that the jury deliberated for about 3.5 hours on Friday. They came in this morning about 8:30. A little after 1, the courtroom doors were unlocked. We all went inside to see what was going on. There was a question from the jury. The jury had a question about the definition of the word abet, which was in the jury instructions. And it took the lawyers for Mr. Woodyard and for the prosecution and the judge a good half an hour to work out the answer he was going to give to the jury. And that answer went back about 2:10 or so. And it was about 30 minutes later that we notified that there was a verdict in the case.
Kevin, I have a question, because I know Chris has done so much on the carotid hold, and we've talked so much about this neck hold. When you heard him testify, take the stand in his own defense, and we know that Elijah was vomiting and was on the ground, vomiting in his mask, how, besides the fact he thought he was going to die, how did he justify that decision?
Well, it was this statement made by the officer who was convicted in the first trial, Officer Randy Rodema, that said his exact words were, "He just grabbed your gun, dude," which Officer Rosenblatt presumably and Officer Woodyard definitely interpreted as Elijah McClain was trying to get a hold of somebody's gun during that struggle. And so when he testified, Nathan Woodyard said, you know, that the first thought that went through his mind was that he was about to be shot. And that justified the use of the carotid hold and an effort to get him restrained so that he could not do that. Of course, the prosecution has raised the question a number of ways about whether that quote-unquote gun grab actually happened. It's impossible to tell from the body camera footage. You'll remember that a couple of the cameras ended up on the ground. One of them that somebody was still wearing is pressed up against another person. So all we really have from that whole sequence is audio, not really good video. So it's hard to know exactly what happened. But that was the justification for the use of that carotid hold, which is designed to cut off blood and oxygen to the brain, render a person temporarily unconscious, basically so that the police can get that person handcuffed.
It's taken 4 years from when that body camera video first happened to now, and then you're in the courtroom and that verdict is read, and it obviously elicits different responses from different sides of the room. Can you talk about that, the emotion in the room at the moment?
Yeah, the courtroom was pretty full, I have to say. I didn't count the people, but there were 40 people there maybe. There were definitely gasps on both sides of the courtroom. I was on the left side behind the prosecution table in the front row. Elijah's mother, Shanine, was sitting next to Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser. He had his arm around her. Many members of Officer Woodyard's family and his friends were on the opposite side of the courtroom behind the defense, and there were definitely gasps when that verdict was read. Neither side asked, you know, there's this process where either side can ask the judge to poll the jury. In other words, make each juror stand up individually and affirm that that was their verdict. Neither side asked for that. That sometimes happens. And then, Nathan Woodyard is free to leave the courthouse. He's been acquitted in this case.
Yeah,
Kevin, it looks like Shalene is leaving right now with our Alex Lewis, and hopefully she might have a minute to talk. If she does, we know she will talk to Alex because they are very close, and Alex has followed this story for many, many years. No matter what, you can't put your head into the heart of a mother that has lost her child.
Yeah, Shen McClain has certainly been vocal throughout this, even back when many people weren't necessarily listening to what she wanted as far as justice for Elijah. And then certainly in these hearings, we have seen and heard from her. And today, another huge day, hearts, minds, lives changing just a few minutes ago out there in Brighton. We do want to play for you the actual reading of the verdict. It happened just a few minutes ago at the courtroom in Adams County.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Nathan Woodyard, not guilty of manslaughter, reckless, and the lesser included offense of criminally negligent homicide.
And that's that moment, you know, the Perry Mason moment, but in real life. You know, it's not a movie, it's not a TV show.
And you're struck by the fact that Shen McClain is sitting in the front row of that case, and really from the beginning of this, she's been the person at the center of this, sometimes reluctantly, knowing that some of those protests and some of the people were sort of she felt like using her son's name, sometimes inappropriately. But she has been steadfast in her ability to speak for her son, and she's felt that need to be that voice for her son. And you see her walk out of the courtroom today. Obviously a very, very disappointing day for her. And she's got another round of this to go through. This has been extremely difficult on her in particular. And you have to wonder what's going through her mind at a time like this, because this has been just emotionally draining. This has been a number of years. And remember, she was the voice, as you said, Tom, when lots of people were not the voice of Elijah McClain.
The case wasn't getting any attention. No. But when you think of what she's had to live through, hearing about those final moments again and again and again in her son's life, that's just devastating. But so much of the work you have done and what has changed, I mean, justice in a courtroom is one thing, but some policies have changed, right? When we talk about this, because poor Elijah saying, I can't breathe.
This has been a monumental change in policing in Colorado after 2020, after the year that we went through at the beginning of the pandemic with all the protests. There were lots of changes that came to policing in the state of Colorado, most notably this idea of body cameras, where they changed the idea, the concept. Keep in mind that the reason why the coroner said that Elijah McClain died was because of ketamine use. We've now changed the idea of ketamine use in the field. There was this old, antiquated idea of excited delirium, and this idea that maybe Elijah McClain had excited delirium, and that's the reason why he was giving ketamine that day, is because they suspected, looking back nonsensically, that he had excited delirium, but they gave him ketamine. And now in Colorado, you cannot give ketamine in the field on suspicion of excited delirium.
It's amazing to think of Elijah's death that night and how much has happened since. Yeah. Just in that case, but how many times our world has changed. George Floyd shook the United States, and COVID changed the way everyone lives and watches the world. And now here we are today trying to manage that too. You know, I think it's hard sometimes for people, if you weren't there then, to know what it was there and then. So here we are. And Interim Aurora Police Chief Art Acevedo has just shared a statement saying, quote, "As previously stated, I know many have been waiting a long time for the involved party to have his day in court. As a nation, we must be committed to the rule of law. As such, we hold the American judicial process in high regard. We respect the verdict handed down by the jury and thank the members of the jury for their thoughtful deliberation and service. Due to the additional pending trial, the Aurora Police Department is precluded from further comment at this time." That's the Interim Aurora Police Chief Art Acevedo. We're expecting also to hear from State Attorney General Phil Weiser.
If you can look at the fact what this case has also done to raise awareness about what happened in these moments, and never forget Elijah, remembering this young man that loved to play the violin, very slight in stature. And when you talk about excited delirium, that is this term that was thrown out that somebody has some superpower, and it doesn't exist.
Well, particularly at the beginning of all this, when you sort of talk about the idea, the concept that maybe Elijah McClain had excited delirium, remember how he was at the beginning of all this. And that's really sort of critical to our understanding of all this, is that Elijah McClain at the very beginning
Very polite.
was talkative. He was communicating with the police officers. He was having a conversation. Now, the officers clearly felt it was strange that he was walking around in August with a ski mask on, but he wasn't doing anything illegal at the time. And how quickly this moved from sort of a conversation from police officers to that taking him down to the ground really was the focal point of the prosecution's case. And then add to that, everything sort of spiraled into that, what eventually giving him ketamine, and that's what led to his death. But you're sort of struck by, there's a reason why Elijah McClain became a national case, because you look at the victim in this case.
Yes.
Well, we don't see
young
the
man.
body cameras of the de-escalation situations. We do see the ones where things spiral, as you said, or suddenly spin out of control. We are now going to be hearing from
Since the
State Attorney General Phil
appointed
Weiser.
our department as special prosecutors to investigate and hold accountable those responsible for the death of Elijah McClain, we've taken that responsibility very seriously, guided by the facts and the law. We knew that these were going to be difficult cases. In the pursuit of justice and to honor the grand jury's decision that they go forward, we committed to take these cases to trial and to make sure that the truth was made available. Today's verdict is not the one that we had hoped for, but we respect the jury system and we accept the outcome. I thank the jurors for their service in performing this important civic duty. I am very proud and grateful for the team behind me and those who worked on this case. They presented strong cases against the officer involved in the death of Elijah McClain on trial here. And just in a few weeks, the trial against the paramedics will begin. And I know the team handling that case will do their very best work. We remained undeterred in our pursuit of accountability and justice for Elijah McClain. At this moment, I'm thinking about Shen McClain, who has fought hard to keep her son's memory alive and to live on as a blessing. No mother should go through what she's gone through. We must all do what we can to stop the unlawful and unnecessary use of force that can result at people dying at the hands of law enforcement. As I've said before, only then will we have true justice and accountability. Thank you.
Again, the Attorney General speaking and saying he respects the decision made by the jury, but he's disappointed in it. So I would imagine to some extent they are considering this to be a failure on their part to prosecute the case successfully. They think they had a case they could win.
You're already starting to see community reaction to this, and the community reaction obviously is negative to it. There was a lot of support for Shen McClain, there was a lot of support for her family, and there was a lot of anger towards the Aurora Police Department at the time. You now wonder what happens now in light of these decisions.
So what do you think changes in the ketamine case for the EMTs? Because what bothers me about all of this is that it's really hard looking at what juries are deciding that they can't decide who did this.
It's the challenge.
And now you know that the defense is going to say, well, it wasn't us. I mean, they only responded to the officers.
That's the challenge of trying these cases separately, is that one group gets to blame the other group, and that group later on gets to blame the first group. And I think that's what you're seeing right here, is that sort of identity that's happening. It'll be very interesting to see what the defense is going to be, but you can bet a lot of that's going to be, well, we didn't do it, the officers did.
Well, there is reaction. It is starting to happen, of course. It will continue throughout the day. We're going to have much more on that coming up when we join you for 4 o'clock at 9 News. But for now, we're going to return you to your regular programming.